Hello and welcome to another video. Before I jump in on this one, you probably see there's some changes in this little room here. This is my little office that I built for coding, but I've got a little fireplace here that will eventually be keeping me warm this winter. I don't want to put a huge hole in the wall over there until I've tested it out for a year. So this year I'm testing it with a through the window flue system that I'm going to build and run it that way. It'll only ever be run while I'm in here, so I'm not too worried about fire safety. I'm going to take a lot of precautions, but yeah, hopefully in the next few videos when it gets colder there'll be a little crackling fireplace behind me, so that'll be really cozy. But anyway, that's an aside. The reason for this video today is to give you an insight on the one skill that I found that I was really not proficient in enough for my comfort when I got my first role as a software developer intern. And that is the skill of debugging. So as a software developer, debugging is really it's a core skill. You could almost say that debugging is synonymous with software development. Code is going to break, code is going to go wrong. There's going to be unexpected errors that happen in an application, and you're going to have to fix them. Things aren't going to work the way that you want them to. They may be surprising, they may be expected. Either way, you're going to get errors that come up, things that don't behave the way they should, and you're going to need to figure out how and why these errors have come up and how to fix them. And usually you'll get an error shown to you in a console, for example, and then you have to take that error and figure out, all right, what do I need to change in my code base to make this error go away and make this thing behave the way it should. And that's the art of debugging, and really that is what software development is most of the time. It's pretty rare that you're going to sit down, write 500 lines of code and not have a single error. You know, it's possible, especially if it's something you've done many times and you kind of understand the flow in that segment of code and how it fits in with an application. It's possible, but it's very unlikely. Usually you're going to have errors. In other scenarios, you may be working on tickets where you're assigned to fixing an error in an application that was unexpected. So that's the art of debugging. Now in the Odin project, we do get some exposure to debugging. There's a lesson or two on debugging, and we're building projects. And as you're building your projects, you're writing code, and chances are, because at that point you're very new to writing code, you're going to be making lots of mistakes, and you're going to be getting lots of errors. And you're going to be scratching your head figuring out, why on earth am I getting this error? And you've gone through, you've looked at the error, you found the line of JavaScript, for example, where that error is occurring. You're like, okay, I missed an apostrophe or this variable's name wrong or something, right? You figure out that your error can be fixed by making a change. Now, in the Odin projects that we're doing, these projects are pretty simple. And usually there's just a couple files of JavaScript that we're working with. You know, it could even be up to 10, 15 files of JavaScript that you're working with depending on where you're at in the Odin project. Or conversely, if you're doing backend, say Ruby on Rails, we're using fairly simplistic Rails applications. We're just using the model, the view, and the controller. It's very, very clean. It's using the core Rails structure, so it's fairly straightforward to understand where the issue is happening in your code. And so debugging at this point is quite easy to do because there aren't too many places where things could go wrong. For myself, I learned basic debugging using the Chrome console. You know, you go into your JavaScript file. Well, first you may see an error in the console and figure out what line the error is, or if something's not working the way it should be, you can go in and put in console log statements and then go and look at your browser console and see, okay, is my code behaving the way I expect it to? Am I hitting the method that I expect? Is this variable got this value, etc., etc. So this is all fairly simplistic debugging, and these are very important kind of fundamental debugging skills. But when you get your first job, chances are you're probably going to be working on something a lot more complex than the projects that we're building in the Odin project. And with more complex projects, the debugging is a little more complex as well. It isn't rocket science, and once you get used to it, which you will become proficient at the debugging. But for me, when I first started at FreshBooks, it was the one thing that I felt was like, wow, I really was, I really needed to ramp up this skill. I really was kind of underwhelmed by my own ability to debug when I got there. So there's a massive front end Ember.js application for handling all the JavaScript, building the front end. And then on the back end, it was using Python Flask and Python Django and a ton of microservices, maybe 50 microservices that all kind of communicate where they need to create the FreshBooks experience that you have when you go and use it in the browser. So there was kind of two areas for me to get used to debugging. And one, you can throw in other variables there where you're working in contained environments like Docker. So it's going to be different to debug within one of those environments than it would be to do it locally, for example. So that's an aside. What I'm trying to say here, that there's many kind of different nuances you have to get used to when you are debugging more complex applications. But for example, on an Ember.js application, when I got to start working on one of these and was assigned a ticket with a bug, I had no idea what to do. I was used to going in, I knew my files in JavaScript where they were. For example, building, I don't know, tic-tac-toe or something, or a calculator. I knew where the file was, and I knew roughly where the lines of code were, where something might go wrong when I saw an error. But all of a sudden, when you get an Ember.js application with thousands of different files in, you get an error that comes up that tells you it's in some obscure named looking file on this line, and you're like, okay, what am I supposed to do next? But really, like anything in coding, you just break it down into its simple parts. You start with that line of code in that file, and you try and figure out what it's doing, and then you can use your debugger, your console, your browser console, and start debugging there with breakpoints to figure out what exactly is happening. So it took me a while to learn how to do this. I really wasn't sure at first, and I had to pair with a senior, ask them, okay, step me through your process of debugging. And that really helped me understand, oh, okay, it's really straightforward, but this is the way it's done, and it was all new information to me, so it's something to learn. I think, I'll touch on it briefly, but for example, you're going to get your error, you're going to figure out the file it's in, the line it's on. You go and you take a look at that method, you understand what that's doing, and now sometimes you need to know more about the architecture itself. So Ember.js is a model view controller based front-end framework, which is pretty complex. It's tough to get your head around. It's got a steep learning curve. Hopefully you could figure out what's going on within the file, but maybe you need to understand a bit more about how the framework is working as well in order to debug certain errors. But generally, you're going to go and look at that method and the variables it's using and see, okay, is this variable the expected value? Is the right method being called that I expect, etc. And one thing that I learned that was kind of new to me was, I can actually go into a file in my code base. I can copy, say, a method name or a particular line of that code, go into my browser console, and then search that line of code for all the JavaScript, how it gets compiled. It's going to be in there somewhere. And then you can go in through your browser and insert breakpoints. You can also insert breakpoints on your application as well if it's running hot and updates in your application are showing up live in your browser. You can put breakpoints in that way as well, but it's probably easy to work through the browser. And then once you've got your breakpoints in, you can step through and sort of like, again, is this method being hit, the values, the variables available, the ones I expect, etc. Ember.js is quite complex. There's a lot more going on there. There is the Ember.js plugin you can get in Chrome, which kind of adds a bit of power to your debugging. It lets you know what variables or what properties values are at any given time. It's similar in React as well. You have like a React plugin which will do the same for you as well. So getting to understand and know how to use those tools on the front end is very important. I recommend watching videos of developers on YouTube debugging in these frameworks. So if you're doing React, watch some React videos. Ember.js, watch those videos, and just spend some time. I mean, if you compare live with a senior or someone who knows what they're doing, even better. But either way, spend some time with someone who's doing this, whether it's live pairing or just through watching YouTube. Understand how they use the debugger, and that will really, I think, help set you up to be a more proficient developer when you do get your first job. It will make you more efficient in building your own applications as well. And then same for the back end. At FreshBooks I was doing Python Flask, and I had to figure out or learn how to debug using that. Similarly with Ruby on Rails, it's not that different on how you use a debugger in both of those environments. I mean, there's a library or a gem that helps you do it. You can put in statements within your code. Debugger works for both depending on the libraries and gems that you're using. And then you're going to step through, you can either control it from the front end in the UI, if your back end is, again, hot with your front end, and you can, it depends on how your application is set up, but you can, if you're running the UI, you can run a certain functional method or UI flow, and then it's going to hit the debugger in your terminal, and then you can interact with the session there, again, see, is this method being hit, what variables are available, what are their values, etc. Or you can run it live straight from the console, calling methods from the console to debug that way. These are all things that I didn't know while I was doing the Odin project. I had to learn on the job. Debugging, like I said, it is synonymous with software development. It is the one thing that I would say, if anyone asks me what's the one skill that I should really double down on and understand, is debugging. Understand what tools are available to you in the tech stack that you're using, and then get practice using them and watch people using them so you can understand or kind of shortcut your development, your learning time by taking their workflows as your own and tweaking them as you need to go along. It's very rare that you're going to write code that doesn't need to be debugged, in my experience, and I think most developers experience. So yeah, happy debugging and get lots of practice doing it, and good luck. If you have any questions, leave them down below, questions, comments. How is your debugging skills? What would you rate them right now, and do you think you'd benefit from improving them? Right, thanks.